Hello, all, and thank you for coming to the Right Hive annual conference. My name is James Lloyd Dulin. I am the author of the Manitou series, starting with No Heart for a Thief, and it is a great pleasure to be here to moderate our conversation on if I could turn back time and what would we do when if we were to start publishing all over again. We're going to have a conversation and try to jump into some topics because one truth I think we can all get behind is that writing and publishing are two very different skill sets, and uh, we all learn as we go, and we're still learning. So, time to share some of those tricks that we've learned along the way. So, I'm gonna start by asking Lucy, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your books?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, hi, I'm Lucy A. McLaren. So I'm a fantasy author, generally dark slash gothic fantasy. My latest book is Echoes of the Ether Stone, which is a gothic horror fantasy book, inspired by the Jack the Ripper murders, but set in a fantasy world, and the killer does not get away with it this time. Um, I'm kind of very heavily inspired by like real life stuff, political issues happening in the world at the moment. All my books, the common thread being, I've got a series called The Commune's Curse, of which the first two books are out, and this standalone book, Echoes of the Etherstone. The common thread is that they're kind of very heavily like anti-fascist, anti-patriarchy kind of messaging throughout there. And for me, I kind of have had quite an up and down journey with my publishing. Like my first book came out via a small press, I then subsequently got the rights back. I mean, we'll get into this, but yeah, I'm kind of interested in talking about this because, like you said, Jane, it is such a learning curve in terms of publishing. You know, going from being like a debut author with a small press to now hybrid author, it's been a journey. So I'm looking forward to chatting about it.
Well, I am an author of Southern fiction, Southern literary fiction, Southern Gothic elements of magical realism. My debut novel, The Cicada Tree, made its way out into the world in 2022. My second novel just came out in March. It's titled Sing Down the Moon. And, I really do focus on elements of the Southern Gothic and, where beauty lives and juxtaposed so closely to decay. And really, within that vein, those things that interest me, trying to reconcile the romantic notion of the American South with its with the very troubled past that the American South has had. And my first two books are told from the perspective of female protagonists. My current work in progress, I'm venturing out and I'm telling my story from the point of view of a 13-year-old boy.
Hi, I'm Bruce Buchanan. I am the author of The Blacksmith's Boy, a new adult fantasy novel from Wild Ink Publishing. My second novel, also from Wild Ink, called The Return of the Cerulean Blur, a superhero's redemption story, will come out later this year. And then I recently have signed a four-book YA romantasy series with the Entwined group for their YA imprint. And the first book in that series, The Goth Girl Who Saved the World, will come out in February 2027.
Well, it is a pleasure. We're just meeting, and so I'm excited to get to know you a little bit over the course of this conversation. Um, and Robert, as you just said, you just published your second book, so we all have at least two books out at this point. Can you tell me something that, went well for your first time at bat when you published your first book, either by luck or good planning? What went well for you?
Gosh, well, I didn't know what I didn't know. And as you said very
Yeah.
early on, writing a book, talking about a book, and getting a book out in the world are they're three different skill sets. And I just really didn't know what I didn't know. And like a lot of writers, I have a day job. I think that one of the things that I was very wise about very early on was because I knew as I was getting close to publication that I really wasn't quite sure how to get the book out into the world. So I did work with a publicist the first time out who really helped me. She did an awesome job. Not all publicists are created equally. I was very fortunate to work with a very reputable one who was able to work within my humble budget. So for me, I think that that's one of the things that I'm glad that I did because I always say two things. You can rest assured of two things, death and that every Tuesday a new crop of books is going to make its way out into the world, and we're all trying to get just a little bit of attention. And so for me, I think that was probably one of the wisest things that I did. And then moving forward, I think that, there were a lot of things that happened just accidentally, positive things, being at the right place at the right time, one opportunity breeding another opportunity. So I think that the first time out, I was just rather amazed that it did as well as it did, with me knowing very little about anything.
Well, so as I said, my first book came out from a small press in 2022. And yeah, I mean, I was obviously very excited to get offered a publishing contract after kind of querying for a little while. Um, so I think as much as it didn't work out, it was a good experience to have that kind of right off the bat because I learned a lot from it going wrong, basically. And it not working out with that publisher. I mean, I met a lot of great authors via them, and I'm still friends with them now and have a kind of very valuable network through that. And I learned a huge amount about, don't, even if you get published by an actual publisher, don't expect kind of the marketing to be done. You have to have to do it yourself. And so that was a very steep learning curve, understanding what that looked like. I'd never heard of like the ideal reader at that point, and now it's evidently so important when you're looking to market books. But yeah, so kind of a bit of a backwards experience, I would say, in terms of like, it wasn't great actually looking back on it, but at the time it was amazing. Like, having my debut book out, it was the first book I'd written, and it got picked up, and that was like a real high that I rode.
I was fortunate to get some help from some really good people on the way. I'll point out two names: Amy Nielsen, who is both a writer and a literary agent. Not my agent, but she is a literary agent, and also Shelby Reed, who writes as S.E. Reed, who is an award-winning author. I just kind of stumbled across both of them just on social media, and interacted with them a little, and they were kind enough to give me some guidance and help me avoid some pitfalls. So I think, getting to know some more experienced writers who had published novels and published things, in the publishing ecosystem, that was a big plus. Having some kind of mentor figures to guide me, and that was just A, luck, and B, just them being kind enough to help me, because I just stumbled across them, and they were willing to help. And so that was one thing that went really well for me early on. And one thing they did, they got me in touch with Wild Ink Publishing, which didn't happen immediately, but they ended up being the publisher that published my first novel and that will publish my second one. But the two of them, made that introduction, and that was a big break for me.
I think that of the writers I've known and spoken to, everybody has a similar experience of a lot of highs and lows that ride back and forth throughout the journey, and we kind of try to ride those highs when we can, because it's going to be difficult along the way at some point as well. Talking about when you're published, when you first published and the steep learning curve of it, is there something that you overestimated or underestimated the importance of when you initially published your book? If you can speak on one that you overestimated and one that you underestimated.
Yeah, I know that I underestimated and this goes back to even before I published. I certainly underestimated the importance of having a writing community, not just for networking purposes, but also, just kind of as a support structure, because, there are those highs and lows, and you need other writers who can, relate to you and give you not just advice, but also support. My first three attempts to write a novel, I failed. I quit because, in large part, I tried to do it all alone. I didn't really, I mean, I had family and friends, but who were sympathetic and helpful, but I didn't have a community of fellow writers who could kind of be there with me and guide me and cheerlead and who I could in turn support. So that was that was one of the things I really underestimated early on in my journey was the importance of having a writing community to lean on and to celebrate with. Um, in terms of overestimating, I think I always overestimated how long it takes to actually write a novel if you stick with it, on a consistent writing basis. It is certainly a challenge and a daunting task, but if you can, just knock out, an average of a few hundred words a day, you can have a novel within a year's time or less. I think to me, it's boiled down to having a consistent writing schedule. And so while I don't want to underestimate the amount of time it takes to write a novel, I do think it isn't as challenging from that standpoint as I may have once thought it was.
Yeah, definitely going back to the marketing being the underestimated bit, and I think that's something that you have to adapt to with every book that you release. It's not a one size fits all thing, and having been year by year, the kind of publishing scene is changing and what people are looking for and how people are marketing. So it's kind of something you have to constantly adapt to. So yeah, I've arguably learned a lot in the 4 years since my book came out, but equally I'd still know very little. It's a constant learning curve. Um, Overestimated probably the power of social media to sell books, because it really doesn't. I mean, it does for some authors, but again, it's if you've got a particular audience on there, then great. But if you don't, it can kind of feel just very much like you're plugging away, putting a lot of work into something and getting very little in return for it. So that as well, like coming to terms with the fact that that's not necessarily something that's going to result in a huge amount of sales has been a process.
Similar to Lucy, I think that I underestimated the importance of marketing, being able to be out in the world with your book. And I think that perhaps I overestimated the importance of social media. But one of the values, and of course, one of the things that working with the publicist that I worked with and continue to work with, she was able to coordinate getting the book out, to bookstagrammers and influencers and to get it out on a social media book tour. And I think, and I do believe for me, there was, by her doing that, there was some positive impact towards sales. And one of the wonderful things about that is that if you have a bookstagrammer who has reached, I don't know, let's say 20,000 followers, that's 20,000 opportunities for at least someone to see the cover of your book, to be able to at least make a choice. So I think, I overestimated those things from a sales marketing perspective as well.
Yeah. It aligns with my experience as well. I think that I underestimated the longevity of what it means to continuously be marketing, and it's just not the initial publish or the initial tour that you might run with your book. It's a constant effort. And so to that fact, like I agree, one social media post does nothing. A handful do nothing. You might even have a great interview with a fairly big booktuber, or get your book in front of a book talker, and that might not push the needle. It has to be something that's just constant. And so I think I underestimated how much energy would have to go into that rather than writing at some points in the career and the journey. Do
One of
you?
the things I like to add to that, James, if you
Yeah.
don't, one of the things that I guess I underestimated some years back is that, it's not good enough just to write a good book. I
No.
was under the impression, oh, you write a great book, people will find their way to the thing, and that's just not the truth. But not only now do you have to be, do you need to write books that readers are interested in reading, but you have to be this brand, and people, you
Hmm.
really do, in most instances, have to have this social media presence. Not only do people want to read your books, they want to have this perception or at least attempt to know who you are. And I
Yeah.
certainly underestimated that.
Yeah. If you build it, they will come only works for ghost baseball fields.
Absolutely.
Um, no, I totally get that. I think there's a interest nowadays of really trying to know the author, especially um, when you're an indie published author or you work with an indie press or a smaller press. There's this push to get to know the author in a very intimate way, um, that that I think is unique to our time of publishing and not necessarily something that happened 20, 30 years ago. But with all this marketing talk, did you have any kind of marketing plan when you first approached publishing, or and how would you say your marketing plan is different today than it was when you started out? What it was like at first and what it is now?
Because I've always kind of toyed with the idea. I remember the first publisher that I went with mentioning it, but it was just completely outside of like the realm of possibility in terms of price. I do remember them sending me a massive questionnaire about like marketing plan and stuff, and debut author, absolutely no idea what I was just kind of filling out. I don't know, stuff that didn't make any sense with hindsight. It was never going to work, and they had kind of various ideas of like, oh, reach out to uh, BuzzFeed or whatever, online places to do lists or articles or whatever, and I did, and I never got a response to anything. It just ended up being a complete waste of time, time that could have been spent writing, the thing I actually wanted to do. So I just kind of was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do any of that anymore. Like, I'm not going to waste time writing an article that's never going to get put anywhere or doing an interview that's never going to get put anywhere. Um, I've read a lot about kind of the power of newsletters, so I have been trying to like focus on building that as an audience. I can, because it's something that's outside of social media. If you ever lost your social media for any reason, you've still got this audience there that is, in theory, interested in reading your books. So they've signed up for a reason. So that's been something I've tried to focus in on and spend time doing once a month. But yeah, it's for me as well. A difference is, I started out writing more traditional fantasy, my Commune's Curse series, and have now shifted over to gothic horror fantasy with this book, and my next one are both more towards that side. So it's a slightly different audience as well. So I feel like I'm probably making it harder for myself in terms of like trying to still market both sides, but they're not necessarily, there might be an overlap in fantasy readers, but they're not necessarily the same audiences. So yeah, just kind of making it really hard for myself. Again, I have just tried to make peace with the idea of, I'm going to post whatever I like doing on social media, basically, like whether it be like, oh, this is what I'm writing, quotes in my book, character art. Canva is great. I love making stuff on Canva. It doesn't necessarily reach a huge audience, but it also doesn't take much time, and I can just kind of whip it up, post it, and then not really think about it too much. Probably not the best marketing scheme, but that's where I'm at right now. I've got a 4-year-old,
Yeah.
I've got a job, I'm trying to fit all this in between, and still also want to write. So it's hard balance to strike, certainly.
One of the interesting things, about that is that I thought, oh, okay, you want a publicist, you go get a publicist. And what I realized early on is when the publicist that I worked with came to me highly recommended, And what I realized part of the way through that initial conversation that we had is that I was not interviewing her. She was interviewing me. She wanted to get a sense of whether or not, she felt that she could work with me, which I found comfort in. It wasn't a situation where she's just going to work with someone, that she can't help.
Hmm.
Um, I think that our initial plan really hasn't changed. We have this good relationship. She does a lot of the social media, Instagrammer stuff, and getting the book sent out to various media outlets. But I do all of my own events. So that really is from the first book to the second book, we've followed pretty much the same imprint. For both of my publishers, though, I did have to go forward with a marketing plan. And I don't think that I really deviated between 2022 and now. Now, what that will look like a couple of years from now, when the next book makes its way out in the world, I don't know. The world is ever changing, so God only knows what we'll be up against then.
I did start out with a plan. You know, I uh, I actually had a pretty detailed plan, and honestly, one thing that has changed while I've done a number of writing events, I didn't realize how difficult it can be to schedule author events in bookstores. Um, that's not as easy as I think. I would have thought. Before I tried it, that oh hey, so and so wants to sell books, and we'll get a cut, and it's a win-win, and it seems that way on paper, but in reality, it's hard sometimes to get a call back, an email back. Sometimes you have to ask several times. Um, that's been something that's been challenging. And one thing I've found though is if you have a signing, you know, try to do the best you can to be responsive to the bookstore and make it worth their time, and then that way hopefully they'll invite you back in the future, and build those relate. It's kind of, it's like a lot of things in this business. It boils down to relationships. So if you can you know share their social media post about other signings, and and come out to see other authors if they're your local bookstore, and support them in other ways, then they're going to be more likely to support you when it's time to do an in-store event. Another thing I found, a lot of local libraries have events for authors, and usually those are free to participate in. So those have been really good. So check with your local library that they may have something for authors. That's something though that the event part is one of the many things I didn't know much about in marketing, and I'm still learning.
I think that's something a lot of new writers don't understand, and something I didn't understand was when I was getting into this, how much all the extra outside of writing would take over my writing time.
Hmm.
So we all have different obligations outside of writing, and now there's another obligation on top of that. I kind of just happened into a marketing strategy, if that's what you could call it, for my first book. I reached out to blogs that I knew featured indie authors, and one happened to do my cover reveal, and I was, lucky enough to be working with an artist that was fairly well known in indie fantasy communities, Felix Ortiz, and so that got me a lot of ARC reviewers, and I was able to get my book out to a lot of people before it released. And that was kind of like the extent of my marketing plan as I started. It was a big boost, but it definitely is not something that can work uh, in any kind of long-term plan. So a lot of it is cooking up on the fly if you're not really sitting with it. And I think, Robert, you said that your publicist you got through a recommendation. I have found some of the best tips and tricks and tools that I've gotten have been through speaking with other authors and learning from them and learning what their successes have been. Um, this isn't necessarily something that we had planned on a conversation for our conversation, but can you talk to that experience of working with other authors and community and how that has shaped your approach to publishing and marketing and producing your books?
Leaned on some beta readers. For my first book and subsequent books, I think it's important to have other perspectives. It doesn't mean you have to take all their advice. That's another thing I've learned, that just because someone offers you advice after they've beta read your book does not mean you have to take that advice. But I think it's good to get other perspectives before you attempt to publish, or attempt to find a publisher, query an agent rather. I think that sort of feedback from other authors can help you refine what you're doing, and maybe eliminate some potential problems with your story. So that certainly helped. Having other authors beta read for me definitely helped. Also, talking to people about do's and don'ts about in-store signings, passing along tips on marketing opportunities. There are a lot of blogs and Instagram pages that share author content, promote authors, at no charge, do book reviews, and having a network of fellow authors, they can put you in touch with those opportunities. In fact, I'm doing a science fiction convention here in North Carolina soon. It's my first ever physical convention that I've ever been a guest speaker and author at, and that entirely came about because a author I know has done this event before. He can't do it this year, and he recommended me to the organizers, and they said yes. So yeah, that those networking opportunities, you never know when they're going to pay off. Now, the one thing you can do though to help them be more productive is you have to give as well as get. If you come across a good opportunity, whether it's marketing or signing or whatever, be sure to support the people who have been there for you as well. Beta read for your writer friends, read and review their books on Goodreads. Promote them on your social media accounts. Whatever you can do to help your writer friends. It's just it's a good practice, and it just makes you feel good.
Yeah, it's definitely been a big part of my journey. I mean, I run Introverted Indies, which is a YouTube channel, Instagram page where we interview indie authors. So that's been kind of a big community building. We run panels and stuff talking about writing, and it's been really good to get to know a lot of indie authors and learn about their journey to publishing and stuff like that. But even before that, I'm part of various Discords, but one called the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Writers Alliance, and met a lot of people there. And it's good for finding early readers, ARC readers as well, reviewers, and even just having friends in the community is really valuable, especially when you come up against something where you're struggling, even stuff like pre-publishing writer's block or wanting to work through plot holes, whatever. It's really valuable having people there who know what you're talking about. And then going through the querying journey, that's a whole other struggle, and having someone again that understands that emotional roller coaster is great. And then picking up tips in marketing, I will always look at other authors' social medias and newsletters and stuff like that, and see what they're writing, what I might be interested in reading, what would draw me to them. It's kind of constantly picking up tips and tricks like that, isn't it? Trying to see what's worked for someone else, try it out, see if it works for you. That's kind of the only way you can do it, is what I've found.
Yeah, I think writing community is everything, really. And very early on, for while I was writing, before I had a book come out in the world, I think, supporting other authors is very important. And I love to go out and support friends and authors that I respected but didn't really necessarily know. And when the cicada tree was um, out, well, before the cicada tree went out on submission with an agent, one of the things very early on that sent panic through me is that he requested that I get advanced blurbs, um, and and I'm thinking I have no idea, I don't know how to go about doing this, and in my mind I thought, oh well, agents and publishers, they do all of that sort of thing for you, which certainly is not the case, and so I had to think very quickly, how in the heck am I going to get 2 to 3 advanced blurbs for this book to go out on submission? And that's when writing community comes in and being out in the world and supporting other authors. So because I had an opportunity to meet authors, go to their events, it was an easier ask. It wasn't quite so awkward and clunky. So that was very helpful. Very early on, I understood how important those relationships are. And as Lucy stated, really just watching other writers, learning from them, not being in a room with people smarter and more talented than you is always a helpful thing because it helps you grow in all aspects, to include marketing and promoting a book, and along with the craft as well.
Definitely. Definitely. And this kind of leads to another question of mine is that, regardless of your path to publishing indie or traditional, it's really a team sport. You have artists, editors, you have designers, arc readers, your author community, it's all involved in that process. So how would you advise young writers or newer writers uh, who are pre-publishing about choosing their team and working together with their team? How would you talk to them about that process of working with others to get across the publishing journey?
I think that trying to find people and working with people, and this is true for even like critique groups, finding and surrounding yourself with people who have your best interest at heart, finding your people, and that's the hard thing. And my experience, in the writing community has been 99.5% lovely.
Yeah.
I've had a very good experience. I joke and say that in Atlanta, you can't throw a rock and not hit a writer. There are a lot of us, there are a lot of us here, but it's a very supportive community. So I've been very fortunate situationally to be surrounded by really great people who are very supportive. But it is hard. Finding that alchemy, finding that right combination of folks. But if you do, it certainly makes things a lot easier and a lot less lonesome.
Definitely start by, having a collaborative approach. Again, that doesn't mean you have to take everyone's advice and do what everyone says, but certainly be open to listening. I've met authors who are just insistent that they're going to do it their way, and that's fine, but that you may have a hard time finding people to work with you if that's your approach. So be collaborative, be open to other people's ideas, be patient. This is something we're all doing, as we have time. So, you definitely have to make time in your schedule to incorporate that feedback from others. And I would also encourage you to, work with people you feel comfortable with. Relationships are very important in writing and publishing. It's not just, what knowledge and expertise someone may bring, but also you just have to be able to mesh on a personal level. I think that's so, this is an artistic endeavor, and, if you don't feel good about the people you're working with, it's not going to be a whole lot of fun. So, find a team that you fit into and feel good about. And that's one thing again, I was so fortunate to get connected with Wild Ink Publishing. They've just been wonderful to work with on my first book, and now on the second book I'm going to be doing that will be coming out, just here in 2026. Um, having those good relationships with them has just been just wonderful for me, and it's made this a lot of fun to do. And so I would encourage you to, you know, to find a good fit for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's for me, I definitely starting out, I had kind of a few false starts in terms of, swapping pages with people and like being ghosted. But then the more I spoke to other people, the more I was like, that's just kind of a normal thing that happens. People just don't gel with what you're writing, and instead of telling you that, they just stop talking to you. Which fine if that's how you want to deal with it. I think communicating is more effective, right? Like, yeah, I've had people who have thought this is not the story for me. I'm not going to be helpful here. I'm just going to kind of back out and let them know that. But the some really long-lasting friendships that I've built have formed just from people responding to, like, putting out. I think it was back, back when it was Twitter, asking for ARC readers. No, not ARC readers, beta readers.
Mm.
Um, and I've just made like one of my longest lasting friendships from that, someone responding to that. And it feels like it's very like right place, right time, because the chances of them seeing that at that point and then responding, and then we both love each other's writing, and it became a very valuable friendship. So yeah, I do feel like social media, as much as it has its real downsides, meeting people in the writing community on social media is a really positive part of it. And I would say don't feel afraid to, if there's an author that you kind of admire and you've seen what they've done, and feel like you'd like some advice from them, just message them. I think a lot
Yeah.
of indie authors that I've spoken to would be very open to people doing that and to kind of giving advice to people starting out on the journey, because there is so much conflicting information out there, and people need to kind of take the right path for them, and doing so requires the knowledge, right, and understanding of what the options are. So get as much as you can. Don't be afraid of reaching out to people.
Yeah. I I think Lucy, you hit on something that I think is very important to acknowledge, that sometimes you can have negative experiences in writing communities. I've had a critique group that was more about critiquing than more than like actually working with each other to create something better. It was more about having your voice heard to critique, and trying to sound smart in the room. And
Mm.
that's never a great experience for authors because we can't outsmart each other into good art. We can lift each other into good art, and critique is an important part of that, but it goes hand in hand with trying to work collaboratively with one another. Um, and so I've had negative experiences with editors in the past, or I ended up getting kind of scammed by my first cover artist before I found Felix. That's a common story in a lot of indie author circles, of getting scammed by artists, or getting poor editors if you're bargain shopping. And so community has been a big part of me being able to find a team, like reaching out, who's your editor? Have you had a good experience? Who did your artwork? When I find an amazing cover, Lucy, like you said, reaching out to authors who I don't know and just saying, who did your cover? I really like that. Was it a good experience? Having that conversation. A lot of people are open to having that conversation. So that communication can be really helpful for finding a team, but acknowledging that there are some pitfalls out there. I don't know about you, but I get an email every other day about a fake writing group that would love to have me as a sponsored author, or a very famous author that's for some reason writing me, and they just loved my book. But there are a lot of scammers out there claiming to be people they're not. So finding your team that can really lift you up and be there supportive and be there supporting you is, I think, a really important part of the journey. Um, with that being said, can you talk to me a little bit about, if you talking about the prompt of this conversation, if you could turn back time and give yourself some writing advice, some publishing advice before you launched that first book, what would you tell your younger self?
I would probably put the brakes on a little bit, because that was the first book that I'd written, and basically as soon as I finished it, which is a big no-no, I was like, right, let's send it out to agents and publishers and stuff. I mean, I did that first round, obviously didn't go anywhere because it was the first draft. It was after NaNoWriMo, and I think a lot of agents are
Hmm.
wise to the fact that if you get a query soon after that, then it's not going to be great. But yeah, the publisher I ended up publishing it with to start with, and it was a revise and resubmit. So they gave me some pointers, and I did revise it and send it back to them, and obviously ended up publishing with them. But even so, I'm rereading it now because I need to write the third book in the series, and I have no idea. I've not been in it for two books, and I'm like trying to get back into it. But it's quite evidently. I mean, I've grown in the time since I wrote that, and it's evidently my first book, right? Like that there are things I would do to change it. I think I shouldn't have been so kind of eager to get it out there and publish it, but I was so excited that I'd written a book that I thought that's the next step. You must now publish this. So yeah, I think it's there's no rush ultimately. There's time to get the book up to where you want it to be. There's time to get feedback from people and make it the best possible version of itself that you can. Um, yeah, publishing is not going to go anywhere, and especially now with how easy it is to self-publish as well. That's again, it's not a race. You can kind of, I hear from so many indie authors that I speak to, like they self-impose these deadlines and they feel like really stressed out and pressured to meet them. And it's like, you don't need to do that, right? You don't need to do that to yourself. You can just take a step back and it'll be done when it's done. It'll be ready when it's ready.
I had this romanticized vision of what it would be like to publish a book. But one of the things that I had not ever really considered is someone actually reading the book. So um, which when that became to be a really true thing, when the book was out on NetGalley, it terrified me because reviews started coming in. And I think one of the things that I would want to be more prepared, have been more prepared for, was from a mental health perspective, just
Oh,
being emotionally prepared for the journey. Um, because at that point forward, the book is no longer your own. It belongs to others. And to do with and say about whatever they so choose. So I think that getting my head around that, I think that I would have liked to have been more prepared for that. That was a quick, brisk learning curve for me. Things went well, but one of the things that I learned very early on is that not everyone's going to love your book. And one of the things that I did to get my head around that is that I went out to other books, classics. I went out To Kill a Mockingbird, and I said, "Well, what have people said about To Kill a Mockingbird?" People give To Kill a Mockingbird 1 to 2 stars. I thought, well, if Harper Lee can get 1 to 2 stars, certainly Robert Gwaltney can get 1 to 2 stars. So that exercise helped me very early on emotionally prepare, and I really sort of do look at the world sort of through that lens now. It's just
yeah.
not every reader has a different experience with each book. Not everyone is going to love me. One of the things that I do hold on to are the bad things that are said, more than the good, and I really should focus more on the good.
I would tell my younger self that number one, you can do this. Like, I gave up 3 times in attempting to write a novel, only succeeded finishing a manuscript on the fourth attempt. And this is, the course of a number of many years. So that would be my first bit of advice is keep going. That's sometimes really hard for writers, both in the writing stage and then the publishing stage. I've seen so many people who were talented and had a lot to offer just, kind of give up on it because they went through a rough patch. And I would first, that would be my first bit of advice. Don't give up. And my second advice would be to, network, find that community of authors. It really is a collaborative effort. It may not so, writing may seem like a solitary pursuit, but it really works a lot better when you have other people to bounce ideas off of and to support you and you support them. And, it really works better when you have a writing community.
You put so much time and effort into writing a book, into really putting your all into it, especially your first go around, and putting this thing out there and then realizing, oh my gosh, people are going to read this and they might not like it, is a very hard thing. Um, and I think on the other side, we've been talking about marketing a lot. We can market all day, but we can't promise that that's going to do anything. We can't promise it's going to move the needle, and that can also, I think, take a toll on your mental health. So maybe can you talk a little bit about how you have safeguarded yourself from some of those tribulations of the publishing journey?
And this may be where I'm at in my life and everything, but I'm not looking at this as a, a career path as much as I am. This is an artistic journey for me. This is something that makes me feel really good to do. It's not something that I'm depending on to pay the bills. I'm fortunate I have a career and and one that I enjoy. But I try not to get too obsessed with things outside of my control, like book sales and things like that, and instead focus on the parts that I can control and that I enjoy, the actual act of writing, collaborating with other writers, meeting readers. I had an event at a library just last month, and I think a lot. It was just it wasn't very it was multiple authors, and it just this didn't have a great turnout. I mean, for the event, and none of us sold very many books. We sold a few, but nothing too. It wasn't a successful event from a financial standpoint, but I had a really great time just talking with the people who were there, and got to meet some really neat people and fellow writers, and kind of get reacquainted with some people that I had already met, but hadn't seen in a while. So at the end of the day, I went home happy because I'm like, it was a good day, even if it wasn't a day of huge book sales. That would just be my advice. And celebrate each win. That's so important. However you define a win, whether it's getting a good review or selling a book, or getting hitting your word count writing target for the week or the day. Whatever it is, just celebrate each win and enjoy it, and focus on the things you can control rather than the things that are beyond your control.
I mean, I'm a therapist, so I'm kind of very aware of the mental health toll. And having spoken to so many authors, basically every author I've interviewed has struggled with imposter syndrome at some point in the journey, struggled with like writer's block and anxiety and self-doubt. And perhaps that comes naturally of, putting so much of yourself into something and then putting it out into the world for people to judge. And as Robert said, not everyone is going to like your book. That is just a fact. That is, you don't like every book that you read, and yeah, it's just the fact that not everyone's going to like what they read of yours. I used to religiously check for reviews, and I've stopped doing that because it's not helpful. It's that authors in reviewer spaces, and those are kind of a big debate that's kind of happens on social media every now and then, but they're not are not for us, they're for the other readers, and you can have kind of loads of positives, but all it takes is one negative, isn't it, to really knock you down. yeah. So for me, being aware of when I need space from it, whether that's stepping back from social media, whether that's stepping back from what I'm writing at the time, um, taking a step back from whatever that is to re-energize. I think it can take a lot from you, like the social media element, the marketing element, writing the book, editing. All each stage has its kind of mental toll, and being aware of that and what you need to recoup is really important.
I think when I've had opportunities to be out in the world to talk about writing and my debut journey and also the stresses of having a sophomore book come out, which are true, and real, and they have their own different set of challenges as well. But I don't compare your writing journey with the journey of others. It's so very hard to look at all of the amazing things that are happening to other individuals, and you begin to compare yourself. You use those journeys as a barometer against your own. And I think, we all each have our own journey. I think it's important to know that good things will happen to all of us, just in different timing. Our journeys are unique to ourselves. So I think that for me, working really hard not to compare myself to other writers who are writing similarly in my genre, I think that's very helpful to celebrate those successes of mine along the way and just not compare myself.
I think we've been speaking about troubles and problems a lot in this conversation, but is there something in your publishing journey that's brought you joy? Like, why do you keep on coming back to publishing your books? You could just write and never publish. So why do you keep on doing this?
There's something that's really special, like every time you hold the book, at the maybe just before release, you get kind of your author copies, and it's just an amazing feeling having that. I literally made this up. Like, it's nuts that we sit there and write for hours upon hours, making up these stories, making up these characters and worlds, and um, it's a fascinating thing, and it's so unique to us as people, um, and the fact that now we're obviously battling against kind of AI slop, and there's absolutely no comparison there. That you can't compare something written by AI to something that a human has spent hours pouring themselves into, and there is just no comparison. It's yeah, for me as an author, it's very special holding the book. It doesn't matter, like Robert said, once it's out in the world, that's it. You have no control over what happens to it. Then it doesn't belong to you anymore. But just having that kind of that feeling of this is something I've created, it's amazing. You can't beat it. And I would never stop writing. It doesn't matter how much I struggle and have moments of self-doubt. I will never stop doing it because for me the benefits far outweigh the cons.
Absolutely. It's connecting with readers. I mean, they're the other side of of writing. I mean, I do love writing, and I love, I've certainly done that in the past where I've just written stuff that I never really thought anyone would ever read. But to me, it's just so much more enjoyable if I think that someone else is going to read this and react and respond. And it may not be a huge number of people, but it just makes me appreciate all the people who have read my work even more. I've gotten some really nice reviews on The Blacksmith's Boy, and I'm honored and grateful for those. And I'm a big believer that once a book leaves the writer's hand, it belongs to the reader. And sometimes readers will see things in my work that maybe that wasn't what I had in mind when I wrote it, but that's great. I love it when people have a different take and a different interpretation, or yeah, I that symbiotic relationship between writers and readers is pretty cool.
The creative outlet. I think that my writing life, the act of writing is the one thing that I solely have agency over. The world of publishing, we don't have agency over, but we have utter control over the books that we write. And when I feel, even just like in a writing day, when I've written one really good sentence. There is such joy in that for me. And one of the things that, because writing is such a solitary endeavor, we spend so much time, in rooms alone. That to be out in the world, I've had the opportunity to visit some book clubs, and that is just such a lovely experience. When someone um, loves your work and they appreciate it and they want to discuss it, I find overwhelming. Just the other night, I was with a group of readers, and this woman just read several passages of things that she loved about the book, and it makes all of those stresses and all of that worry worth it. When other individuals find your work to be worthwhile.
I would say that, writing, as you said, is a very isolating art form, but publishing is a very community and interconnected part of that art. So that sharing of our stories is something that makes it not just something that we're telling ourselves, not something that we're just kind of self-indulging in our own imagination, but we're also communicating that with people. And I think that's really a beautiful part of what publishing can be. Um, so thinking and keeping that in mind, what does the next step of your publishing journey look like, your author career? What are you planning to do next in this realm? Robert, you talked a little bit about an upcoming book. Do you have any kind of different plans for that publishing journey?
I think that I just marvel when I was writing the Cicada Tree. I had this awful fear that perhaps that'd be the only book that I had in me that I'd ever be able to write. So I was just amazed that, I had another book in me. And I do believe that I have more books in me. But the journey ahead, I think, is just to continue to do the good work. I think that, it took me a while to figure out who I was going to be as a writer, finding that voice. And a voice isn't something that you just find once and tuck away in a box, right? If we're lucky, it's ever evolving. And I think that for me, in regards to my publishing journey, I want to continue to be able to strengthen and hone that voice. And I don't know what that voice. I can tell you who I am today. I know that I'm quite one writer at the beginning of a book and another writer at the end of that journey. So I just really am looking forward to continuing to grow and to be able to continue to explore and to be able to fully empower that voice, whatever that voice might be.
It's really exciting, isn't it, seeing how far you come in between books and from the start and end of a book. I've just come out of a 18-month book writing process, which was quite the journey. And I'm actually about to sign with an agent for that book. So that's okay, this is this is a next step. This is going to be a turning point, perhaps. I don't know. Who's to say? Getting an agent is one hurdle, but obviously there's a whole other mountain to climb outside that. But that feels like a big next step in terms of where I'm heading. And yeah, I don't know. It feels like it is so out of control, like Robert said, like what the publishing world looks like, and I'm just going to keep writing stories because that is what I enjoy doing the most. Going to try and finish my trilogy and then head on back to the Gothic side of things because that's where my heart is at the moment. Yeah, it's for me. I want to keep learning and growing as an author. Similar to Robert, really, it's a joy to see yourself grow and become better and better the more you write.
I and let's celebrate the small journeys or the small or not so small wins. You just got an agent, so that's a pretty big step in that process for the next stage of your journey. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you.
I actually have a pretty concrete answer to that. I've gotten my first book published, my second book signed and in the works, and it's going through final edits now. But I just less than 2 months ago, I signed a 4-book deal for a young adult romantasy series set in the late 1980s, and I'm really excited about that. I think it's something that's going to be challenging for me to complete, but I'm really excited for it's something that It's witchy. It's got a lot of pop culture references to some of the bands I grew up loving in the 80s that the main character is a fan of as well. And so that's going to keep me pretty busy for the next couple of years. The publisher wants them on a pretty quick turnaround, and so I'm going to be busy, but I'm so excited to take this leap and work on this the 4-book series with the Entwined Publishing Group. So
We're coming to the end here. One thing I like to do when I have the opportunity to host something like this is ask panelists to shout out an author that you might want to draw some attention to, somebody in your community who you think really deserves some more eyes. So, Lucy, do you have anybody you want to shout out?
I certainly do. As I said earlier, I run Introverted Indies, and I run that with Lydia L. Baker, who, if you like sci-fi dystopian, she's also got an unpublished crime thriller series. So if that sounds like your bag, then give her a follow. If you go to Introverted Indies on Instagram, you'll find her through that. But yeah, she's a fantastic author.
There's a debut novelist. His name is Jeffrey Dale Lofton. He's a Southern author. His debut book is a coming of age fictionalized memoir titled Red Clay Susie, and it's amazing.
got so many people I would like to shout out. First of all, I will shout out some of my Wild Ink Publishing siblings. Adele Lyles, who is a great YA writer. Avery Timmons. These two are also YA authors. My good friend Diane Billis, who also writes a lot of YA, a lot of queer fiction, and Mariah Stillbrook, another YA fantasy author, and a couple of other folks I'd like to give a shout out to. Aaron Joe Eldry, who is querying this awesome literary fiction book that you're going. I'm confident that you're going to hear a lot about in the next couple of years. And another querying author and my editor extraordinaire, Demi Michelle Schwartz, who is a podcast host and a writer and a musician, and also an amazing editor. Like I said, my mentors and friends, Amy Nielsen and S.E. Reed. So those are just off the top of my head some of the many people I would love to give a shout out to.
Thank you for sharing that. Just to shout out a couple of indie authors that I love. Tatiana Obi wrote Sister Samurai. If you're interested in anime and kind of Black politics in anime, that can be a really cool novelization to read. It's a short novella, so if you want to check that out, that's really cool. Or Krista Matar has a much longer book. Legacy of the Brightwash is the first of the series, and that's an amazing book. So if you haven't seen either of those two authors, please check them out. And then lastly, I'd love to do a quick round, plug where people can find your work. Tell us if you have a newsletter, where we can follow you, how we can connect after this.
Instagram, Facebook, my website is robertlgwaltney.com, and you can purchase my books wherever books are sold.
Thank you.
Main one for me is Instagram, Lucy_A_McLaren, and website is lucyamclarenauthor.co.uk, where you can sign up to my newsletter if you want to hear me waffling about mental health and books and what's happening in the world. Those are the main places to follow me.
Well, my website is brucebuchananauthor.com. That's probably the first place to go. but I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, uh, Facebook. You can, probably send me a carrier pigeon, and that would work too. And so I'd love for folks to follow me, check me out. I'm on Goodreads. Yeah, I'm not too hard to find, and would love to interact with fellow authors, readers, pretty much anybody. So, but Bruce Buchanan Author is my website, and I am in the process of starting a newsletter, and information on that will be announced coming soon.
Thank you very much. I might need some help on the mental health front, but we'll also check out the books. Thank you so much for being a part of this panel and joining us to talk a little bit about what publishing is, what your publishing journey has been and where it's going. Thank you all for watching and joining us with the Write Hive annual conference. I hope you have a great time with all of the different panels that happen. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next year.